Today we're exploring the brioche stitch, a beautiful and established reversible stitch pattern. We'll start with the fundamental brioche knit stitch, then progress to the next stage by syncopating with brioche purl, and then advance to the last stage with circular brioche, without the stitch glitch. At any stage, you can create a unique scarf, cowl, or shawl project using these techniques. Let me know in the comments how far you get. At the end, we'll take a more detailed look at some of the features of this stitch pattern to maximize success with your project, including yarn and needle size. If you're new to knitting, check out my Learn to Knit, the ABCs in Cotton series for the basics. They're linked in the description below. So let's knit. Brioche needs a stretchy cast on, and the looser the knitting, the stretchier it needs to be, especially for a cowl. I'm using a loose German twisted cast on, a stretchy type of longtail cast on. Set up the same as for longtail cast on. Rather than under the first leg and over the second, go under both legs, around the thumb, down the second leg, then reach back and catch the third leg. Now come out the way you came, dipping the needle. Now release the thumb, return it between the yarns, and tighten. One more time, under both legs, catch the second leg, now back to catch the third leg, as for the basic longtail cast on, and back out. Make sure to leave it a bit loose to add some extra stretch, or you can use 2 needles together for the cast on. I'm making a bigger swatch than usual, so we have fabric for the circular knitting later on. I'm casting on 12 repeats of 2, so 24 stitches, plus 1 to make it symmetrical, and 2 more for the selve edges, so 27 stitches in total. I've made the last stitch a regular longtail cast on, so the selve edge starts nicely. I'll use a slipped selve edge. Slip one purlwise with yarn in front for the first stitch, and we'll always knit the last stitch. The brioche stitch has 1 setup row. Knit the first stitch. The second stitch is slip 1 yarn over. Yarn in front, yarn over the needle, and slip the next stitch purlwise at the same time, ending with the yarn in the back. This creates a stitch with a yarn over on top. Repeat these 2 stitches for the setup row. Knit 1, slip 1 with a yarn over. You can also work the slip 1 yarn over with the yarn in the back, as long as you catch the yarn with the right needle before slipping the stitch. The slip 1 yarn over is a special stitch combination that is the first half of the 2-pass brioche stitch, and it sets up the structure. We'll have 2 more special stitch combinations by the end. Knit the last 2 stitches for this setup row only. For the next row, slip the selve edge. The first stitch is slip 1 yarn over like the last row. The next stitch already has the yarn over, so the next stitch is brioche knit, which is worked into both parts of the combo looking stitch. The brioche knit is the corresponding special stitch combo to complete the slip 1 yarn over. Repeat these 2 stitches for the whole row. Slip 1 yarn over, brioche knit. We're alternating starting the first half of the stitch with the slip 1 yarn over and completing the stitch with the brioche knit. Because of the odd stitch count, we'll add 1 more slip 1 yarn over before knitting the selve edge stitch. With an odd number of stitches, the stitch pattern is a 2-row repeat. So the next row starts and ends with a brioche knit. It's easy to read your knitting, but be careful not to lose stitches off the needles. It's a hard stitch to fix. Brioche fabric needs a few rows to get established, so after 5 rows, including the setup row, it looks like this. And after 9 rows, it looks like this. You can see the 2 passes for each completed stitch. The yarn over created on the other side is arching over the knit-looking stitch on this side, creating the stitch pattern. If you like this stitch pattern, you can continue in this way for the whole project, and you'll have a wonderful squishy scarf. Skip to this timestamp for the cast off. To progress to stage 2, I'll add 2 more rows to make 11 rows, ending on a row 3. For this stage, we'll syncopate with brioche purl. After slipping the selve edge, we can see that the first stitch is complete, and we can start the row with the slip 1 yarn over like before. The next stitch is halfway done. This time, we'll work a brioche purl to complete it. As with other purl type stitches after a yarn over, it's important to wind the yarn right around the needle before the purl, so the yarn over is maintained. You can see that the brioche purl we're making looks the same as the brioche knit made on the other side, because brioche purl is the reverse stitch of brioche knit. Continue alternating slip one yarn over with brioche purl with an extra slip one yarn over at the end, and make sure to knit the selvage stitch. For the next row, we'll start and end with a brioche purl. Again, it takes a few rows to get established. After 4 more rows, it looks like this. I've ended on a row 5. You can see when you start the row that the slip one yarn over is now on the brioche purl looking column. The unique look of the fabric is called Syncopated Brioche because of the temporary displacement of the stitch pattern. There are lots of variations of Syncopated Brioche. I have some examples in the next section of the video. If you like this stitch pattern, you can continue in this way for your whole scarf, syncopating between the 2 brioche stitches as often as you like. I suggest that you always change to knits on an odd row, that is after row 4 of brioche purl, and change to purls on an even row, that is after row 3 of brioche knit. Skip to this timestamp for the cast off. If you're still with me, let's advance to stage 3. We'll need the last special stitch combination to avoid the stitch glitch. For the next stage, we'll be transitioning to circular knitting. I'll go through it step by step here, and if you want an explanation of a running change to circular knitting with an easier stitch, I've linked the videos on the candy wrapper scarf and the mistake rib cowl below. I prefer magic loop with circular needles, but of course, double-pointed needles work too. With the working yarn on the right, fold the left edge forward and over to the right edge, so the working yarn is on the back layer. Now pull the needle cord out about halfway through the fabric and push the needles in so they're parallel. Rather than knitting back, we'll start knitting around in a circle. For circular knitting, and especially magic loop, it's important that the working yarn is managed carefully so it doesn't make an extra loop around the needle. With the working yarn coming up between the needles, pull out the back needle to set up for magic loop. We'll knit the first stitch through the back loop that was a selvage for just this row, so it's not twisted. We'll incorporate it with the other selvage stitch when we get to the end of the round. Before sliding the old stitch off, tighten the working yarn gently to prevent a ladder. Not too tight or the back needle won't fit back into the stitch. Notice that the next stitch is a completed stitch, so we'll work it slip one yarn over as before. The next stitch is half complete. To match the column, it should be worked as a brioche knit. Continue alternating slip one yarn over and brioche knit around. When you move from one needle to the next, make sure to manage the working yarn appropriately. If the last stitch on the first needle is worked as slip one yarn over, the yarn comes up and over the needle to form the yarn over. If the slip one yarn over is the first stitch of the second needle, the yarn comes under the back needle and a yarn over on the front needle. The order of which half of the stitch is the last one will alternate each round. At the end of the round, being careful to manage the slip one yarn over, slip the old selvage stitch to the first needle next to the other selvage stitch. Due to the structure of brioche stitches, there will be a glitch in the transition to the next round if we use a regular brioche knit stitch for the round connection. I'll show a swatch and a chart in the next section. So instead, we're going to use a different stitch combination to connect the rounds that looks very similar and actually has a similar structure. It's in the same family as the slip stitch rib. The video is linked below. The slip stitch combo stitch is a double knit stitch. Each half is worked every other round in this case. This causes the two halves of the stitches to layer. For this round, the first stitch of the combo is knit, and the second stitch is slipped with yarn in front. Make sure not to slip the stitch with a yarn over like the other slip stitches. Continuing the round, we can see that the next stitch needs to be completed using a brioche purl to stay in pattern in the column. Continue the round, alternating slip one yarn over and brioche purl. Make sure to manage the yarn when moving to the next needle, especially the slip one yarn over before or after the needle change with the brioche purl, ending with a brioche purl. For the next round, slip the first stitch with yarn in back and knit the next stitch. To stay in pattern, continue alternating brioche knit rounds with brioche purl rounds. To syncopate, after a round 8, work the rounds, purl, slip one with yarn in front, then repeat brioche knit, slip one yarn over, ending in brioche knit. Round 10, slip one with yarn in back and purl, and repeat slip one yarn over, brioche purl, ending with slip one yarn over. Now the connecting stitch needs to look like a brioche purl on this side to stay in pattern. To syncopate back, after a round 9, work a round 8. In general, syncopate by working 2 brioche knit rounds consecutively. Continue knitting until your project is your desired length. To mirror the cast-on edge, work 1 row or round knits and purls without creating new slip one yarn over stitches. For the cowl project, the first combo stitch can be worked slip slip knit or slip slip purl, whatever is the pattern. I've used the Icelandic cast-off as it's stretchy and matches the cast-on nicely. Make sure to cast off loosely for extra stretch. You can use this little swatch cowl to estimate how many stitches you need for a larger project. Although the cowl is worn around the neck, it must fit over the head, so make sure to measure for the head. Brioche fabric can stretch quite a bit, and that's what we'll talk about next. The brioche stitch has a wonderful hand feel, with both drape and loft, due to the 3-dimensional stitch structure. I'm using firm acrylic yarn and a smaller needle than recommended to give the cowl a firmer structure. If you make a wider cowl or want a looser fabric, you can use soft squishy yarn and/or larger needles so it drapes more. You can also use the fisherman's rib construction to get the same effect. The fundamental stitch structure is the same, but how it's worked is different. Rather than using the slip one yarn over and brioche knit combo, the stitch is worked as a knit and then a knit one below combination. Because the knit stitch uses up more yarn than the yarn over, when it's opened up, the additional yarn loosens up the stitches and creates looser and therefore larger gauge fabric. Make sure to make a big enough swatch to reveal the true stretch of the fabric before determining the stitches needed for your project. Brioche is stretchy to begin with and really stretches out with a loose gauge. You can see how loose the gauge is in this Mobius shawl. It was meant to be a loose cowl. With an even number of stitches, basic brioche is worked in the same way for each row. This is a great choice for a scarf or shawl because it's essentially a 2-stitch 1-row repeat. You can also use an odd number of stitches for a scarf if you want the 2 edges on one side of the scarf to look the same, even if it's not exactly reversible as a result. In order for the split in the cowl to look symmetrical and for the pattern for the closed part of the cowl to work out, I cast on an odd number of stitches, with the self-edge stitches forming the connecting stitch to make it look even in the round. Once the scarf is connected in the round into a cowl, an even number of stitches will have a glitch at the beginning of the round in the front of the cowl. The glitch is due to 2 consecutive slip-one yarn overs or 2 brioche stitches at the join in the round, as you can see in this swatch, in the instructions, and in the diagram. To make matters worse, the 2 slip-one yarn over stitches create a large ladder as well. If it helps to understand why the glitch exists, for moss stitch to be seamless in the round, you need an odd stitch count. For vertical rib, you need an even stitch count. Brioche is a mixture of these two. It looks like a rib, but has alternating stitch pattern like moss. So it needs to be an even and an odd stitch count at the same time to be seamless. The slip knit or purl slip combo stitches solves these issues for the most part, as it replaces 1 stitch with a combo of 2 stitches that are alternatively worked and slipped. The look and feel of the stitch pattern on both sides of the fabric is maintained, and this stitch combo is a bit tighter and so minimizes the ladder at the join of the rounds. For the swatches in this video, I've knit quite a few rows before syncopating. For this brioche sampler shawl, each section has a different cadence of syncopation. 2 rows, also called brioche moss, 4 rows, also called broken rib brioche, and no syncopation at all, so all brioche knits. You can see the whole length of the shawl in the short that's linked below. Syncopated brioche is a fascinating technique because it involves both sides of the fabric, and it looks good on both sides of the fabric. However, while making this video, I realized that it doesn't look exactly the same on each side, so it's technically not reversible. You can see on this scarf, the syncopations are not the same. Here the brioche knit-looking stitches are on each side of the syncopation, and here the brioche purl-looking stitches. This is due to the two-pass nature of the brioche stitch. If you want each side of the fabric to be consistent, the instructions provided in this video syncopate from knit to purl on one side of the fabric and from purl to knit on the other. On a final note, syncopated brioche can also be used to make eye-catching 2-color brioche patterns. If you're interested in a video exploring 2-color brioche knitting, including syncopation and increases-decreases, let me know in the comments. The next video will kick off an exploration of the elegance of Mobius projects. Each video in the series will feature a different reversible stitch pattern and a different Mobius construction. So pick up your knitting and create something awesome. I'll do my best to respond to comments, and I'd love to hear about your favorite reversible knitting pattern. Also feel free to like this video and subscribe to my channel for more awesome reversible knitting. For those of you still here, the last few years I've been working hard to find simple ways to feel better, what I call my daily well-being practices. This is not medical advice, I'm just sharing what works for me. Today's daily well-being practice is the importance of expressing gratitude. I'm grateful for many things in my life, and I'm especially grateful to and for my mother. I'm grateful in general because she's an amazing woman and mother, and specifically because of her help and support of this channel. She was my first subscriber and is often the first view of every video. I'm mentioning this in this video because brioche, also called patent steak, is her favorite stitch, and so I'm especially excited about this video. I also want to take this opportunity to thank her for creating and playing the piano intro and outro of the videos. She's a woman of many talents and fascinating experiences.